Hi folks, how are we doing? Difficult times, I know, difficult times for all of us. I was deeply moved last night by so many folks standing at their doors and their open windows and clapping and cheering and singing in gratitude for the amazing work those in the health service and others are giving of themselves for the good of us all. No greater love can there be. I cannot help in this sense, but I can offer something for the heart, the mind, the spirit, and the soul. These little reflections are part of what I am offering to us all. It's my attempt to offer something to help us, to give some meaning and life, to offer salvation from the despair that can grow from our shared suffering. So here is today's offering, the fourth in my series, while all of us are physically separate due to this coronavirus. So I invite us to still ourselves in silence for just a few moments. Let's invite the loving presence to be here amongst us and to awaken from deep within each and every single one of us while I light our chalice flame. The flame of freedom here in this cup of love and acceptance and belonging. Know that you are loved, that you are accepted, that you are wanted, and that you are needed. You are needed exactly as you are in this moment, just as you are, exactly as you are. Let us join our hearts, our minds, our spirits and souls in this time of physical separation. May we know, even when we do not know, that we are deeply connected in ways we may not even have begun to know just yet. Let us nurture those connections deep in our own hearts. May we open our hearts to each other and to live in loving acceptance, for we are all kin. May we find hope in the suffering of these days, that we may be free from despair and find meaning here and now in the little things that we can do. Amen. So I'm going to begin today's reflection with a favourite poem by the wonderful and wonderfully named farmer, poet, philosopher, environmentalist Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry is many things, but first of all, he's a farmer. This is The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come in the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. These beautiful words touch me so deeply. Whenever I feel pain at the world or at myself, my heart turns towards these words. They begin to sing in my heart. How many times have I got caught up in suffering, and how many times have I turned towards despair and yet begun to find salvation once more in these words. They bring me back to life. There are days when I despair at the world. There are days when I despair at what life is. There are days when I despair at myself. I ask, what is the point of all of this? Can I really make a difference? Is there a place for love in this cold, hard, unfeeling world? Some days I feel utterly gripped by despair. Thankfully, I do not feel this way very often. Thankfully, when I do, these feelings do not last very long. For I always seem to find the faith to turn back towards love. Hope is born again, and meaning begins to emerge out of the very ashes of despair. I was visited by these feelings as I realized what was setting in throughout our world these last few weeks. I grieved for some time, went through the classic stages, tears came, and eventually acceptance. As the acceptance came, my focus turned towards what I can do. These last few days in particular, this is where my focus has been. I keep on turning towards instead of turning away. And as a result, meaning has begun to emerge in my fragile, finite human being. Now all this got me thinking, and it got me remembering. So I just want to share something that came back to me. Now, mathematics has never been my strong suit. At primary school, I was brilliant at mental arithmetic. I think in all my time there was only one occasion when I failed to get 10 out of 10 in a mental arithmetic test. I remember my cousin once telling me that this was because I was the most mental in my family, and in fact in my whole school. She may well be right. What's amusing though is that the comment has stayed with me all these years. It makes me chuckle these days. Now, although I was brilliant at mental arithmetic, the same cannot be said for mathematics, especially equations. I struggled to both understand or even remember them. They just didn't make sense in my head. I think even then there was a part of me that didn't like the idea of reducing things down to simple equations. Never made sense to me. Never been the way I've looked at life. Even when I studied history and politics, I hated the way that economic and social history seemed so often to be reduced to equations. I would stand back and just think to myself, that just does not make sense. This is not what life is. This is not what history is. What has this got to do with how we live or how we used to live? Is life really made up of equations? Now, thankfully, the world in which we live is made up of very different people than myself. People who can make sense of such things and who truly know their value. Such things are essential to how much of life works. Not all of life, but how some aspects of life works. And this is especially clear at the moment, as I and I know others are listening to those, we're really listening to those who understand the mathematics of viral outbreaks, how these graphs and equations work. Thank God for such people. May we have the wisdom to listen and to respond appropriately. Now you may well be wondering what the hummer I'm going with all of this. Where the heck am I going? Well, there is a point to my meanderings. There is actually an equation that does in fact make complete sense to me. You may have heard of it. The equation is D equals S minus M. D equals S minus M, which roughly translated means despair equals suffering minus or without meaning. The equation is the creation of Viktor Frankl. In Man's Search for Meaning, he wrote, man is not destroyed by suffering, he is destroyed by suffering without meaning. He discovered that if we have a why to live for, we can endure anything. More than that, actually, it is this that allows us to thrive, to be all that we were born to be. Not only to improve our own worlds, but to serve our world. Not just our own lives, but to serve our world. Now, the question this raises, though, is how do we uncover meaning? Where do we find meaning in our lives? What about those who tell us that life is essentially meaningless? And the other way, is there just one meaning? Is there one truth? Now, Frankl would suggest that it's actually for each of us to discover our own meaning in any given situation. That this actually is our primary task. That this meaning may not be in the given moment that we're in right now. That this meaning may be found in some place in the future. Some purpose, some meaning that is yet to come. It does not fetishize the moment. Now, as I ponder this, and my struggle with equations, I believe that the reason I find it hard to live by equations is because they seem to reduce life down to nothingness, and there's a danger here for me. I have found something in my life that sustains me in the storms of life, something that gives me meaning in my suffering, that saves me from despair. I can't fully explain what this is. For me to even begin to try to explain it would reduce it in meaning. All that I know is that when I turn back and out beyond myself, I experience something infinite, something beautiful, something that can only be described as pure love, something that makes me feel whole, something that fills me with meaning as I live meaningfully. Meaning comes as you live meaningfully. I experience it like Wendell Berry did in nature. For me, it's especially when I hear the birds singing. My favourite, the blackbird. Although Sue heard a wonderful wood pigeon the morning after our wedding that was singing from our window, as we couldn't really go out into the world. I experience it with others when engaged in meaningful and open conversation. I experienced it when I walk around the streets of my home and look deep into the faces of people there and thereabouts, something that we're all being denied at this moment in time. But thankfully, we're finding new ways to communicate, to connect through modern media. We can still look into each other's faces. We can still hear each other's voices. We can still connect and communicate, even though we can't physically touch. And that's hard. That causes suffering, deep suffering. But I also experience this deep meaning when I'm alone, when I sit in silence, contemplating the simple fact that I am alive, that I can draw breath. And I experience it in prayer, when I reach beyond myself to that great mystery that I have come to learn is at the core of all life, even those aspects I don't like so much. I find it even in the deepest suffering too, that love is there. That love is there. Now, some people will say, how can you? They will say that life has no real meaning beyond physical sensation. How can you? Look at the suffering in the world. These are good questions. Maybe the questions are not answerable. And maybe that's not good enough for some people. Maybe that's not good enough for anybody. Well, so be it. I can't answer that. I can't give you your meaning. That's for you to find. All I know is what I experience, and that this divine load of love is there in my life. I never lose faith in this, even in those darkest moments. When I turn toward it, I feel my cup runneth over with abundant love. This tells me that even in those darkest moments, when despair is closing in, I know that this too shall pass. And when it does pass, those of us who are still here will have to create the meaning from this in how we live and breathe and have our being, and in building lives of remembrance for those that we all lose. We'll all lose someone. May we all find the meaning in our shared suffering and be inspired by hope rather than overcome by despair. We shall overcome. Some questions to ponder. Where do you find meaning in your life? Where do you turn when the suffering sinks in? How are you finding ways to connect in these challenging times when usual social contacts have been removed? And how can we contribute now and perhaps in the future? What can we do? How do we create the meaning? And now a song. I invite you to just still yourselves in silence while I sing for you this classic spiritual. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome That's especially for my mum and her husband Greg, who are feeling things intensely at the moment as they remember a great loss. My mum reminded me of this song only the other day when she heard a young boy singing it in the 1960s. So that brings us to the end of this little reflection. I'm going to end with some words of blessing. We can all bless. We need to bless more. We need to make our whole lives a blessing. So I invite us to still ourselves once more while I offer some words of blessing. May we return to our lives blessed by this time together. May we find meaning in our shared suffering. May we create meaning through our very human, fragile, finite lives. May we overcome the creeping despair by creating meaning in the suffering present in our lives. We shall overcome someday. One day we'll be able to walk once more hand in hand together. So may our lives become meaning-filled, and may we bless this life in all that we feel, in all that we think, in all that we say, and in all that we do. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Amen.